The fluorescent hum of the diner, a sickly yellow against the bruised twilight, did little to cut through the damp chill clinging to my coat. Outside, the truck stop parking lot, 2 a.m., wrong truck was a graveyard of sleeping giants, their chrome teeth glinting under the indifferent moon. I nursed a lukewarm coffee, the bitterness a familiar companion. Years had bled into a dull ache, each sunrise a pale imitation of the last. The badge was long gone. A ghost I sometimes felt still pressing against my chest. My fingers traced the condensation on the glass, the dampness seeping into my skin. This was my life now, faded diners, the stale scent of diesel, and the gnawing echo of a case that had broken me. They called it the Clockwork Killer, a moniker whispered with a mixture of dread and grudging admiration. He'd been precise, meticulous, leaving behind a trail of victims arranged like macabre art installations. The waitress, a woman whose face was etched with 1,000 weary smiles, refilled my cup without asking. Her movements were a practiced ballet, born of countless nights spent in this purgatorial glow. "Rough night?" she'd asked, her voice a low rasp. I just nodded, the words catching in my throat. What could I say? That I was drowning in yesterday? That the faces of the dead still flickered behind my eyelids? My gaze drifted to the window. The vast expanse of asphalt stretching out before me. The hulking silhouettes of 18-wheelers were like slumbering beasts, their trailers a testament to journeys I'd only ever dreamed of. Now, I was just a man with too much time and too little purpose. A flicker of movement at the edge of my vision snagged my attention. A black sedan, sleek and out of place among the utilitarian rigs, idled near the far end of the lot. My gut, a finely tuned instrument of suspicion honed by years on the force, gave a faint, unsettling twinge. It was the kind of vehicle that didn't belong in a place like this, not at this hour. I watched as a figure emerged from the driver's side, a silhouette against the faint glow of distant streetlights. Tall, broad-shouldered, moving with a deliberate, almost unnerving grace. They didn't look like a trucker looking for a late-night snack. Then, another figure emerged from the passenger side. Smaller, more agile, my breath hitched. They approached one of the parked trucks, a nondescript trailer with faded company logos. The figures didn't break into the trailer. Instead, they worked on the lock with a series of almost surgical movements. A small tool, glinting faintly, was inserted. A soft click, barely audible, echoed in the stillness. My eyes narrowed. It was too clean, too quiet. This wasn't some smash and grab. The figures slipped inside the trailer. Minutes ticked by, each second stretching into an eternity. I found myself leaning forward, my coffee forgotten, my senses on high alert. The diner, the waitress, the stale coffee, it all receded, replaced by a primal focus. My mind, long dormant, began to stir, dredging up old memories, old instincts. They emerged, carrying what looked like heavy duffel bags. They moved with the same unhurried efficiency, no sign of panic or haste. They loaded the bags into the sedan, their actions economical and precise. My hands trembled as I reached for my wallet, the worn leather a familiar weight. I paid the waitress, my eyes still fixed on the empty stretch of asphalt where the sedan had been. The lock, the precision, the silent efficiency, it was too much. It was him. I left the diner, the night air biting at my exposed skin. My old instincts, buried deep beneath layers of regret and self-imposed exile, were screaming. This wasn't just a random act. This was a message, a taunt, and it was being delivered by someone who moved like the ghost of the killer I'd failed to catch. A wave of nausea washed over me. This couldn't be happening, not again. I nursed the lukewarm coffee, each sip a bitter promise I'd already broken to myself 100 times. This was not my life anymore, not since, but the crumpled napkin in my pocket, the one with the hastily scrawled address and the cryptic message, felt like a brand against my thigh, a ghost whispering in my ear. The message was from a former informant, a man whose memory tasted like stale cigarettes and desperation. He'd been spooked, terrified, and whatever had spooked him, it was tied to the only thing that could drag me back into the mire, the echo of a killer I never caught. The coffee was a lie. I left the chipped mug on the counter, the sticky surface clinging to its base. My breath misted the glass as I stepped back out into the biting air. The wrong truck. That was the detail that gnawed at me, not just any truck, but the wrong one. It implied a plan, a deviation, a moment of calculated error, or perhaps a deliberate signal. My old sedan, a relic that coughed and sputtered its way through life, felt like a betrayal of the purpose that once drove me. Now it just carried the weight of regret. I pulled out of the lot, the gravel spitting a protest under my tires. Warehouses loomed like skeletal remains against the ink-black sky. The address pointed to an abandoned factory, its rusted gates ajar, a gaping, more inviting disaster. This was it. This was where the informant had said to meet him, but he wasn't here. The silence was a heavy shroud, broken only by the distant groan of a train. I pushed through the gates, the screech of metal, a raw wound in the night. My footsteps echoed unnervingly on the cracked concrete floor of the main hall. Dust motes danced in the weak beam of my flashlight, like phantom dancers performing for an audience of one. The air was thick with the scent of decay, of oil, of something metallic and sharp that made my teeth ache. In the center of the hall, beneath a gaping hole in the roof where the moon bled through, was a workbench. Not just any tools. These were specialized instruments, the kind used for intricate work, for dismantling and reassembling with a surgeon's care. And among them, gleaming dully, was a small, intricate lock-picking set. My gut clenched. This was not random. This was deliberate. This was his signature. The same signature that had adorned the scene of the string of heists that had been plaguing the city for the past week. Each one a masterpiece of planning and execution, leaving behind only bewildered security guards and empty vaults. And each one bearing the subtle, almost artistic, imprint of the killer I'd hunted for years. The one who had vanished, leaving me with nothing but the wreckage of my career and the ghosts of his victims. I ran a gloved finger over the cool metal of a specialized tension wrench. It was almost too perfect, too clean. The informant had mentioned something about a new player, someone who had learned from the best. Had he meant me, there was either best in this twisted context. The thought was a bitter draft. A scuff of leather against concrete from the far end of the hall snapped me to attention. My hand instinctively went to the concealed weapon beneath my jacket. It was a reflex I thought I'd buried deep. No answer. Just the rustle of movement, the faint creak of metal. The light in the upper window winked out. Whoever was here, they knew I was coming, or they'd been waiting. I moved cautiously, my flashlight beam sweeping across the vast, cavernous space. There was that a figure in the periphery, a flicker of movement behind a stack of rusted barrels. My mind, ever the traitor, conjured the phantom shapes of my past failures. Then I saw it. Not a napkin this time, but a blueprint meticulously drawn. It detailed the security systems of the city's central bank. And in the corner, scrawled in elegant, looping script, was a single word: practice. This wasn't just a copycat. This was someone who was not only mirroring the killer's methods, but was actively honing them, preparing for something far more significant. And the ghost I thought I was chasing, he might not be a ghost at all. He might be teaching. And I, Cole, the disgraced detective, was now the only one who understood the lesson plan. The emotional tone of tension, a low thrumming beneath my skin, began to escalate. This was no longer about my past. This was about the city's future, and my own desperate, final chance at redemption. The lukewarm coffee tasted like regret. Bitter and thin, a poor imitation of the real thing. I swirled the plastic spoon, the clink against the ceramic mug, a tiny, sharp sound in the cavernous quiet of the diner. Outside, the truck stop parking lot. 2 a.m., wrong truck, was a canvas of shadows and faint, artificial light. A hulking 18-wheeler, its trailer emblazoned with a faded logo of a grinning cartoon bear, idled with a low rumble that vibrated through the soles of my worn boots. The stranger had been insistent. The bear, he'd rasped, his voice like gravel grinding under a boot heel. I'll know it when I see it. And here it was, a behemoth of steel and diesel, incongruous in this desolate stretch of highway. I'd been waiting for an hour, the gnawing emptiness in my gut a familiar companion. My own demons were restless tonight, their whispers amplified by the silence. The case, always the case. Tall, lane, moving with a predator's economy of motion. He didn't approach the diner, but instead circled the 18-wheeler, his gaze sweeping the lot. My hand tightened around the mug. This was the moment. The stranger had promised information, a breadcrumb to the phantom I'd been chasing for years. He stopped by the driver's side door, a silhouette against the garish neon sign. He didn't open it. He pressed it against the metal of the door. A faint click, barely audible over the idling engine. Then he straightened, looked directly at the diner window where I sat, and gave a curt nod. A signal. My heart, a stubborn, recalcitrant thing, gave a lurch. I stood, leaving the half-finished coffee, the stale air of the diner clinging to me like a shroud. The gravel crunched under my feet as I crossed the lot, the hulking truck a silent, watchful presence. The stranger was gone, vanished, as if he'd been a figment of the night. The driver's door was unlocked. I hesitated, the old instincts warring with the gnawing curiosity. This was precisely the kind of reckless plunge that had landed me on the outside looking in. I pulled the heavy door open. The cab smelled of stale smoke, cheap air freshener, and something else, something metallic and acrid. The driver's seat was empty. The dashboard was a cluttered landscape of forgotten receipts, a crumpled map, and a half-eaten pack of gum. On the passenger seat, a small, black box sat nestled amongst the debris. It was identical to the one the stranger had used. My fingers trembled as I picked it up. It was cool to the touch, made of a dense, unfamiliar material. I turned it over. No markings, no manufacturer's logo, just smooth, unyielding blackness. I pressed a tiny indentation on its side. Nothing happened. Then my gaze fell on the floor. Tucked beneath the driver's seat, almost invisible in the dim light, was a thin, leather-bound notebook. It was a familiar shade of deep crimson, the same color as the one I'd found at the scene of the warehouse job, the first heist. I lifted it, my breath catching. Inside, the pages were filled with neat, precise script. Not a diary but a ledger, dates, times, locations, and figures, numbers that made my stomach clench. Each entry corresponded to a meticulously planned theft, the kind that had been plaguing the city for weeks. Jewelry stores, art galleries, now this, a transport truck. What was inside? I flipped through the pages, my blood beginning to hum with a dangerous energy. The entries were too precise, too detailed. And then I saw it, a date 3 days from now, a location, the old abandoned munitions factory on the docks. The scale of it, the sheer audacity, made my head spin. A police cruiser, too close, too fast. My instincts screamed. I shoved the notebook back under the seat, the small black box slipping from my grasp and skittering across the floor. "Hey, you there?" a voice boomed, amplified by the cruiser's external speaker. I scrambled out of the cab, the truck door slamming shut behind me. I didn't look back. I ran, the gravel biting at my heels, the flashing blue and red lights painting distorted streaks across the asphalt. I was Cole, the disgraced detective, caught red-handed at a crime scene, the phantom's trail leading me not to answers, but deeper into the mire. The stakes had just risen, and I was already losing ground. Outside, the truck stop parking lot, 2 a.m., wrong truck was a canvas of shadows and the glint of 1,000 distant stars reflected in wet asphalt. My eyes, accustomed to the deep gloom, scanned the hulking shapes of 18-wheelers, each one a sleeping beast. None of them were the one. The waitress, a woman whose name I'd forgotten the moment she'd scrawled it on my check, refilled my cup without asking. Her movements were economical. Practiced, she'd seen a lot of weary faces pass through this place, seen a lot of hopes drain out with the dregs of cheap coffee. I met her gaze, a flicker of understanding passing between us. We were both just trying to get through the night. The previous day had been a wash. The warehouse heist, like the others, was clean. Too clean. No forced entry, no witnesses, just a gaping void where valuable cargo used to be. The same crane that had taunted me years ago. I pulled out the worn notebook, the pages dog-eared and smudged with ink. My own meticulous notes, once a source of pride, now felt like a testament to my failure. I traced the outlines of the cranes I'd sketched, each one a monument to a life I couldn't save. This new series of heists, meticulously planned and executed, wasn't just about money. It was a message. The targets, a pharmaceutical distributor, a high-end electronics warehouse, a rare coin vault. Each one specialized in something the other didn't have. But what was the common thread? Greed, sure. But this felt personal. This felt like a twisted form of art. My finger landed on the address of the pharmaceutical distributor. It was in the industrial district, a labyrinth of concrete and steel I knew like the back of my hand. I remembered a specific case, a string of arsons that had plagued the area. The perpetrator had been elusive, leaving behind a trail of scorched earth and unanswered questions, never fully uncovered. A sudden thought, sharp and unwelcome, pierced the haze of my fatigue. The arsons, the timing, the industrial district. Could it be the same mind? If it was him, if it was that him, then this wasn't just about stolen goods. This was about unfinished business. The waitress approached, her presence a soft rustle of fabric. "Need anything else, Han?" she asked, her voice kind. "Just the check," I said, my voice rough. "And a refill." She poured the coffee, her movements still precise. "Long night? You could say that," I replied, my gaze fixed on the swirling black liquid, the heists, the cranes. The pieces were starting to align, forming a pattern that was both terrifying and strangely familiar. It was a pattern I'd tried to forget, a pattern that had broken me once before. I paid the bill, the crumpled bills feeling insignificant, stepping out into the biting night air. The smell of diesel and damp earth filled my lungs. The truck stop parking lot, 2 a.m., wrong truck was still a sea of muted metal and sleeping giants. A connection, a ghost from my past, resurrected in the present, and I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones that this was only the beginning. The game had changed. The stale air of the truck stop parking lot, 2 a.m., wrong truck, clung to me like a shroud. Rain slicked the asphalt, turning the dim glow of the sodium lamps into shimmering, distorted pools. Each drop hitting the windshield of my beat-up sedan sounded like a tiny accusation. I'd followed the anonymous tip here, a whisper in the dead of night that promised answers, or at least a lead. The tip had been vague, a location and a time, a promise of a meeting with someone who claimed to have seen him. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel. Years had passed, but the phantom echo of that case still vibrated in my bones, a constant, low hum of failure. The meticulous precision of the recent heists, the unsettling familiarity of their execution, it all pointed back to the man I'd let slip through my fingers. And now, a string of high-profile robberies, executed with the same chilling artistry, suggested he wasn't just back, he was evolving. A hulking silhouette detached itself from the shadows near a row of idling rigs. Tall, broad-shouldered, moving with a deliberate, almost predatory grace. Not the man I was looking for, not him. This was someone else. Someone who worked in the periphery, a shadow of a shadow. I'd crossed paths with this man before, a fixer, a go-between, a man who dealt in information and discretion, usually for a steep price. I killed the engine. The sudden silence was deafening, broken only by the hiss of tires on wet road and the distant rumble of a passing semi. The Weaver was leaning against a dented 18-wheeler, the chrome glinting dully under the weak light. It was a coiled spring ready to lash out. "Cole." His voice was a low growl, a rumble that seemed to emanate from the very ground. He didn't smile. I didn't expect him to. "You said you had something for me." I kept my voice level, betraying none of the urgency that clawed at my insides. My eyes scanned the lot, a habit ingrained from years of looking for threats, for escape routes. The usual late-night denizens of this place, weary drivers, solitary figures hunched over lukewarm coffee, were either inside or tucked away in their cabs, oblivious to the silent drama unfolding. The Weaver pushed off the truck, his movements fluid. "I know this." "The heists," I answered, cutting to the chase. "They're him, aren't they? The same signature." He took a slow drag from a cigarette, the ember flaring, casting a brief, intense glow on his weathered face. His eyes, when they met mine, were like chips of obsidian. "The pattern is interesting, similar, yes, but not identical. He's learned, or perhaps he's teaching." That last part sent a fresh wave of unease through me. Teaching to whom, to what, who? He blew a plume of smoke into the damp air. "The money moves, the goods change hands, the old ways are being updated. New players in the game, Cole, younger, hungrier." He paused, letting the words hang heavy between us. "Someone is orchestrating this, someone with the original blueprint." My gaze sharpened. I saw him. The Weaver stubbed out his cigarette with deliberate slowness. "I saw a ghost. A memory made flesh. He's more careful now, more, at the old warehouse down by the docks. Yesterday, the abandoned warehouse. I'd found nothing concrete, just the lingering scent of stale oil and something metallic, something that pricked at my memory. "You're mistaken," I lied, my voice tight. Weaver's lips curved into a grim, knowing smile. "Am I the man I saw? He moved with your old gait, your nervous tick when you're thinking too hard." He chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. He looked troubled, like a man who'd seen too much and remembered too little. My blood felt sluggish. He was talking about me. He'd seen me at the warehouse, and he was trying to make it sound like him. A clever misdirection, a way to throw me off his scent, or perhaps he was playing a more elaborate game. "You're wasting my time," I responded, my hand inching towards the inside of my jacket. "Am I?" The Weaver's posture shifted subtly, but I felt it. The coiled spring was beginning to tighten. "Or am I telling you the truth? The man you're chasing, Cole, he's not who you think he is. And the man pulling the strings," a sharp crack, and then the sickening crunch of metal. My sedan's front fender crumpled inward as a heavy object, hurled with immense force, struck it. A tire blew with a violent hiss. The Weaver reacted instantly, a blur of motion. He shoved me hard, sending me stumbling back towards my own car. "Go," he roared. "They know Ira here." Another crack and glass showered from my driver's side window. This wasn't a meeting, it was a trap. The Weaver had lured me here not to give me information, but to deliver me, or perhaps he was also a pawn, a distraction. I scrambled into my car, the steering wheel now useless, the engine sputtering. Not the Weaver, smaller, agile, holding something that glinted. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat. I fumbled with the ignition, the engine catching with a ragged cough. The figure raised their arm. I didn't wait to see what they were holding. I slammed the gearshift into reverse, the damaged fender grinding against the asphalt. Tires squealed as I spun the car around. Headlights cutting through the rain, illuminating. Nothing. The parking lot was empty save for the rows of silent trucks, but the damage was done. My car was crippled. My lead, if the Weaver had ever intended to give me one, was gone. They knew I was here, and they were far more dangerous and far more cunning than I had ever imagined. The confrontation had ended not with answers, but with a brutal, isolating setback. I was alone again, in the pouring rain, my car a wreck. And the ghost I was chasing was leading me in circles, or worse, setting me up for a fall. The screech of tires was a physical blow, rattling my teeth. My breath hitched, a raw, ragged sound in the sudden silence. The truck stopped, parking lot, 2 a.m., wrong truck, the words echoed in my mind, a cruel joke whispered by the wind that whipped across the asphalt. This wasn't just a mistake. It was a carefully orchestrated symphony of misfortune, and I, Cole, was the unwilling soloist. I fumbled with the ignition, the engine coughing to life like a dying beast. My eyes darted to the rearview mirror. They weren't moving, not yet. Waiting for what? For me to make my next clumsy move. My mind raced, replaying the brief, venomous exchange with the informant. The Weaver, he's not the one I think. What did that mean? Was the Weaver a victim, a pawn, or worse, the architect of this elaborate charade? The crack in my window, the splintered glass on my lap that wasn't the work of a scared informant looking to unload information. That was a warning, a very loud, very expensive warning. I slammed the gearshift into reverse, tires spitting gravel. The sedans responded instantly, their engines a low growl as they pulled out, closing the distance with unnerving speed. I swung the car around, the diner's neon sign a garish smear against the Inkai sky, and aimed for the highway's distant glow. My hands, slick with sweat, gripped the steering wheel. The chase was a blur of adrenaline and desperation. My old sedan, a faithful but aging companion, protested with every turn, every lurch. The sedans behind me were relentless, their headlights a constant, accusing glare in my mirrors. They weren't trained to box me in, not yet. They were herding me. Towards what? The woods, an empty stretch of road. I took a sudden hard left onto a narrow, unpaved access road, car bouncing violently. Branches scraped against the paintwork, a frantic scratching sound that mirrored the turmoil in my chest. I risked a glance back. They followed, their headlights cutting through the dust cloud I'd kicked up. They were good, too good. This wasn't some street thug's desperate attempt at a carjacking. This was professional, calculated. The road ended abruptly at a chain-link fence, rusted and sagging. A dead end. My heart hammered against my ribs. I'd been played, completely. Then a sound, not the roar of engines, but a soft, rhythmic clicking. It was coming from inside the fence, from the hulking silhouette of the abandoned warehouse that loomed against the night sky, the Weaver's place. The place the informant had pointed me towards, the place I'd mistakenly believed was a meeting point. I stepped out of my car, my senses on high alert. The air was thick with the scent of damp concrete and something metallic, something faintly acrid. The clicking grew louder, more insistent. It was the sound of machinery, delicate, precise machinery. I crept towards the fence, my movements slow, deliberate. A section of the chain link was bent, creating a gap just wide enough to squeeze through. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to disappear. But the ghost of the past, the one that whispered in my ear every night, urged me forward. The Weaver, the heists, the pattern, it was all connected, slipping through the gap. I found myself in a vast, echoing space. Moonlight streamed through grimy skylights, illuminating dust motes dancing in the still air. The clicking was deafening now, emanating from the far end of the cavernous room. And then I saw it. Not a person, not a group of people. A machine, a complex, intricate contraption of gears, wires, and spinning spools of thread. It was weaving something small, something intricate, and next to it, laid out on a workbench, were dozens of similar objects. Miniature, perfectly crafted replicas of the stolen artifacts. My breath caught. They weren't about the value of the originals, they were about replication. The weaver wasn't a thief, he was an artist, a craftsman, and these weren't just replicas, they were copies, perfect, indistinguishable copies. And then I saw the photographs pinned to the wall directly behind the workbench, not of the stolen artifacts, of the victims. The families of the victims from the serial killer cases I'd never solved. Their faces, frozen in time, stared back at me, and beneath each photograph meticulously laid out was one of the weaver's miniature creations. The heists weren't random, they weren't about financial gain. They were about messages for me. The stolen artifacts, the perfect replicas, they were symbolic, each one representing a life taken, a puzzle left unsolved. The weaver wasn't the killer. He was the echo of the killer, a twisted, artistic memorialist, and the heists were his way of forcing me to look, to remember, to acknowledge the lives that had been extinguished. But why now? And why the elaborate trap at the truck stop, the sedans, the chase? It was meant to drive me here, to this place, to this revelation. The weaver wasn't the architect of this trap. He was the bait, and the real predator was still out there, pulling the strings, orchestrating this macabre dance. Clicking of the machine, once a sound of intricate craftsmanship, now sounded like a ticking clock. The weaver had shown me the pieces. Now I had to find the hand that moved them. The engine of the idling semi idled a low growl, a beast waiting for its master. It wasn't the one I'd been watching, the one that had slipped through my fingers like smoke just hours before. This one, a hulking beast of polished chrome and faded paint, was a phantom limb, a ghost of a lead that had severed. My gut twisted. This wasn't just a missed opportunity, it was a deliberate redirection. My fingers tightened around the cold steel of my service revolver, a weight I hadn't carried in years, yet felt as familiar as my own bones. The driver, a man whose face was lost in the cavernous shadow of his cap, emerged from the cab, stretching with a grunt. He moved with the weary grace of someone who spent their life tethered to the road. He wasn't the target. I knew that with a certainty that chilled me. The real game was being played elsewhere. I retreated further into the dim glow of the fluorescent sign, the buzzing hum a counterpoint to the frantic pulse in my ears. The precision of these heists, the unnerving echo of the ghost's signature, it was all too much to be coincidence. The ghost, the phantom who'd haunted my nightmares for a decade, who'd danced just out of my reach, leaving behind a trail of meticulously planned chaos. Now, someone was picking up his baton, or perhaps the ghost himself had returned, not a trucker, too fluid, too purposeful. My breath hitched. This was it. The moment the board shifted, the pieces rearranged themselves into a far more dangerous tableau. I slipped from my hiding spot, the gravel crunching under my worn soles, a sound too loud in the heavy quiet. I moved faster, my gaze sweeping the lot. The air grew thick with anticipation, the kind that precedes a storm. Then a sound, a soft metallic click followed by a muffled thud. It came from the direction of the diner, its windows glowing a sickly yellow. My blood, which had been thrumming with adrenaline, now felt like ice water. The diner, that was where I'd met Sarah for that brief, fragile truce. Sarah, who'd been a witness, a voice of reason in the cacophony of my own undoing. I broke into a run, the revolver a solid presence in my hand. The diner door swung open before I reached it, spilling light and a wave of greasy, fried food sent onto the asphalt. A figure stood silhouetted against the interior, their back to me. They were holding something, a bag. "Sarah," I rasped, my voice rough. The figure turned. It wasn't the ghost, not the phantom I remembered. This was someone new, someone I'd never seen before. But the glint of the object in their hand, a wicked, curved blade, sent a jolt of recognition through me. And the bag, the kind Sarah always carried. Figure didn't speak. Then they bolted, not towards the highway, but towards the maze of parked trucks. I was caught between a rock and a hard place, the phantom's signature in plain sight and the very real threat to Sarah. My mind raced. The ghost of the ghost's methods, the meticulous planning, the deliberate misdirection. They wanted me here at the truck stop parking lot, 2 a.m. wrong truck. They knew I'd be looking for the stolen goods, the stolen patterns. But this was a new escalation. They weren't just replaying the ghost's past. They were weaving a new narrative, one that ripped through the fragile threads of my present. I glanced back at the diner. Sarah, This wasn't just about catching a criminal anymore. This was about protecting someone I cared about. The stakes had just been raised, not by a calculated move in a criminal game, but by a brutal, personal strike. The ghost wasn't just a specter from my past. He was a predator in my present, and he was hunting what was mine. I shoved the thought of Sarah's safety, the image of that leather bag, to the forefront of my mind. I had to pursue, and I was no longer just playing to solve a crime. I was playing to survive and to save. The wrong truck. The air in the truck stop parking lot, 2 a.m., wrong truck, tasted of diesel and desperation. Not the sleek, black box I'd been tailing. The one that had vanished from the city's gut hours ago, leaving only a phantom ache in my gut. This behemoth, a rusted hulk of faded blue, coughed a plume of black smoke that stung my eyes. My breath hitched, a small, ragged sound swallowed by the night. It wasn't him, or rather, it wasn't that truck. The gnawing unease, a familiar companion, tightened its grip. He was playing with me. I eased the window down, the gritty glass scraping a protest. A sliver of moonlight, sharp and cold, sliced across the asphalt, illuminating a scattering of cigarette butts and oil stains. He knew I was watching. He had to. The precision of these heists, the almost theatrical flair, it was a signature. A signature I knew intimately, a scar on my own past. He was using the same methods, the same twisted logic. He was taunting me. My fingers traced the worn leather of the steering wheel. The old instincts, buried deep beneath layers of regret and cheap whiskey, began to stir. The detective in me, the one I'd tried to bury 6 feet under, was waking up. He wanted a game. Fine, I could play, but this time I wouldn't be the one left holding the pieces. The previous night's encounter replayed in my mind. The near miss, the phantom silhouette vanishing into the urban maze. He'd been sloppy, almost too eager. Was it a mistake or a deliberate breadcrumb? He was testing me, seeing how far I'd follow. He wanted me to chase him, to burn myself out on the trail, but chasing was for hounds. I was a hunter, and hunters set traps. I needed bait, something he couldn't resist. His pattern was clear, a high-stakes target followed by a calculated withdrawal, always leaving a subtle calling card. The calling card was the key. It wasn't just a signature, it was a puzzle piece, a twisted riddle meant only for me. He was proving he was smarter, that he'd outgrown the shadows of our first encounter. A lone figure huddled in a booth by the window, a silhouette against the sickly yellow light. The proprietor. He was the only other soul awake in this desolate expanse. The wrong truck idled, a patient predator. He was waiting for me to make a move to reveal my hand, but I wouldn't, not yet. My mind raced, piecing together the fragments of his modus operandi. The intricate timing, the surgical precision, the utter lack of collateral damage. It spoke of meticulous planning, of someone who understood systems, who could predict human behavior, and the calling card. It was always something personal, a twisted echo of our history. What would draw him out now? Not a direct confrontation. He was too clever for that. It had to be something that appealed to his ego, to his need to prove his superiority. Something that mirrored his own perceived genius. An idea, sharp and dangerous, began to form. It was a gamble, a desperate throw of the dice. But it was all I had. I'd use his own game against him. I reached for my phone, the cracked screen a testament to my own recklessness. I scrolled through contacts, my thumb hovering over a name I hadn't dialed in years. A former colleague, now deep within the labyrinthine bureaucracy of the department. He owed me, and he was meticulous, just like the perpetrator. Cole, a gruff voice answered, laced with years of weariness. I need a favor, I said, my voice low, the words tasting like ash. Something sensitive. I explained the situation, omitting names, focusing on the technical details, the patterns. I painted a picture of a phantom, a ghost in the machine, leaving behind an impossible signature. I watched the proprietor's silhouette shift in the diner window, a tiny flicker of movement. Was he watching me or just restless? Sounds like a ghost story, Cole, the voice on the phone drawled. It's real, I insisted. My gaze fixed on the diner. And I need a specific piece of information. A certain type of alarm system, the kind that's supposed to be unbreachable, the kind that makes a statement. There was a pause, the faint crackle of static, and I need you to help me bait it. He sighed, a sound that conveyed resignation and a grudging respect. Tell me what you need. I laid it out, my voice calm, measured, each word a carefully placed stone in a path leading to a precipice. I described the target, not a bank, not a jewelry store, but something far more symbolic. Something that would scream his name to anyone who understood the language of his crimes. The old city archives, a repository of forgotten histories, of secrets buried deep. He loved the narrative, the performance. This would be his stage. And the alarm system, the colleague prompted. The newest model, I said. The one they're touting as impenetrable. I'd planted the seed. Now I just had to wait for him to take the bait. I glanced at the diner again. The proprietor was gone. The booth was empty. Had I misread this? Was he the bait? The wrong truck, the empty booth. It was all too clean. A perfect, unsettling stillness. The trap, I realized with a sickening lurch, might already be sprung. The neon sign of the diner, a broken promise of warmth, flickered above the empty booth. My breath misted in the frigid air. Each exhalation a pale ghost against the black expanse of the truck stop parking lot. 2 a.m. wrong truck. I'd nudged him, a subtle whisper of unease in his carefully constructed world, and now the silence was a taut wire, humming with the unspoken. The proprietor had vanished like smoke, leaving behind only the lingering scent of stale coffee and a gnawing emptiness in my gut. That emptiness was a familiar companion, a shadow I'd learned to live with, but tonight it felt sharper, more insistent, a flicker of movement at the edge of my vision. A truck, its engine a low growl, pulled out from the far corner, its headlights cutting twin paths through the darkness, not the one I expected. This was a smaller rig, a delivery van, its sides plastered with faded logos of a regional courier service. It idled for a moment, then turned, its tires crunching on loose gravel, and merged onto the highway. Had I miscalculated? Had my carefully laid trap sprung shut on empty air? I leaned back against the cold metal of the truck, my breath catching. The proprietor, the man who'd served me lukewarm coffee and a side of suspicion, was gone. But the wrong truck, that was the key. Not just any truck, but the wrong truck. A diversion, or had I been played? My gaze swept the desolate landscape. The rows of parked vehicles, hulking metal beasts slumbering under the indifferent stars, offered no answers. Then, a sound, not the roar of an engine, but a soft, metallic click. It came from the direction of the diner's rear entrance, a door I hadn't noticed before, tucked away in the gloom. My muscles tensed. This was it. My heart, a traitorous drum, began to beat a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I pushed myself off the truck, moving with a caution born of years on the edge, my senses sharpened to a razor's edge. The door creaked open, a sliver of light spilling onto the asphalt. A figure emerged, silhouetted against the dim interior, not the proprietor. This was a man of medium build, his movements economical, deliberate. He carried a duffel bag, its contents heavy and unknown. He paused, scanning the parking lot, his head turning slowly, methodically. I flattened myself against the side of the truck, the rough paint scraping against my worn jacket. My breath hitched. He was looking for me, or rather, he was looking for the idea of me. The phantom I'd conjured. It was a nondescript model, the kind that blended into any urban landscape, its windows tinted to a murky opacity. He reached the van and fumbled with a key card, the click of the lock echoing in the stillness. He opened the sliding door and began to load the duffel bag inside. This was my chance. The psychological game was over. It was time for the brutal, unvarnished truth. My boots made no sound on the damp asphalt. I closed the distance. Scent of ozone and something metallic oil, growing stronger. He was still preoccupied with the bag, his back to me. Leaving so soon? My voice was a low rasp, deliberately cutting through the quiet. He froze. The duffel bag slipped from his grasp, hitting the ground with a muffled thud. He turned, his face a mask of surprise that quickly hardened into something else. Recognition, and something akin to triumph. "Cole," he added, his voice smooth, unnervingly calm. "I knew I'd be here. Always drawn to the scent of trouble, aren't I?" He didn't reach for a weapon. He didn't bolt. He simply stood there, a predator assessing its prey. The air crackled with an unseen energy, a prelude to the storm. "I've been busy," I replied, my eyes flicking to the van, then back to him. He replied, a faint smile playing on his lips. "And you, my dear Cole, have always been an excellent distraction." He took a step towards me, not an aggressive move, but a subtle shift, a tightening of the invisible leash he'd held me on. The duffel bag, that was the prize or the trap. "This ends tonight," I stated, my voice firm, though the tremor in my hands betrayed the tremor in my soul. "Does it?" He chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "I think, Cole, you're about to discover that endings are rarely as neat as you imagine them to be." He lunged, not at me but at the van. He yanked the sliding door open, revealing not just the duffel bag, but a collection of tools gleaming under the faint interior light. Wrench, crowbar, a coil of thick rope, and something else, something I hadn't expected. A small, intricate device, wires snaking from it like metallic vines. This wasn't about the heists, not entirely. This was about something far more personal, far more devastating. It was about inflicting pain. He snatched a heavy wrench from the van. "You've been a thorn in my side for too long, Cole, a ghost I couldn't quite shake. But tonight, the ghost gets exorcised." He swung the wrench, a blur of metal aimed at my head. The impact against the asphalt sent sparks flying. This wasn't a game of cat and mouse anymore. This was a desperate, brutal dance on the precipice of oblivion. And the show, I knew with a sickening certainty, was just beginning. The wrench clattered, a defeated echo against the grimy concrete of the truck stop parking lot. 2 a.m., wrong truck. My breath, ragged and hot, fogged the dim glow of a distant sodium lamp. He lay sprawled, a broken marionette, his dark eyes wide and unseeing, fixed on the smeared, oily sky. The stench of diesel and desperation hung heavy, a familiar perfume that clung to my skin like a shroud. This was it, the end of the line for him. And maybe, just maybe, for the ghost that had been dogging my heels for years. I knelt, my knees protesting the ache that had become a constant companion. My gaze swept over him, cataloging the sharp angles of his face, the faint tremor in his still hand. He was just a man, a tool wielded by a puppeteer I still couldn't quite grasp. But the methods, the precision, the chilling disregard for consequence, the signature left behind like a taunting riddle, they were all there. He'd called the authorities. Of course, the wail of sirens was already a faint thrum on the horizon, growing steadily louder. My part in this particular act was drawing to a close. I stood, my muscles screaming with a protest I chose to ignore. My eyes scanned the vast expanse of the parking lot, searching for anything out of place, any anomaly that might betray the architect of this chaos. The sheer ordinariness of it all was a clever disguise. Row upon row of hulking metal beasts, their chrome glinting dully, their sleeping drivers oblivious to the drama that had unfolded in their midst. Then I saw it, a flicker of movement near the edge of the lot, where the asphalt gave way to scrubby weeds and a rusting chain-link fence. Not a man, not a truck, something smaller. My heart gave a familiar, unwelcome lurch. I moved, a silent predator, my footsteps muffled by the scattered gravel. As I drew closer, the object glinted. A piece of metal, not a weapon, but something intricate, a delicate mechanism. "Hold it right there," I answered, my voice rough, unused to issuing commands. The figure froze. Slowly, deliberately they turned, and I saw the face. A young woman, her features sharp and intelligent, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and defiance. She wasn't the mastermind, I knew that instinctively. It was a small, intricately carved wooden bird, its wings poised for flight. Familiar, terribly familiar. He said you wouldn't understand," she stammered, her grip tight as she clutched the bird. "He responded you were too broken. Broken people can still see clearly," I added, taking another step closer. The sirens were almost upon us now, their wail a piercing shriek that tore through the night. "What is that?" She hesitated, then extended her hand, the wooden bird resting in her palm. "It's a messenger, he leaves them, as a sign." A sign, of course. The calling card. The meticulous detail I'd overlooked, lost in the grander scheme of things. The serial killer, the one I'd chased and failed to catch, hadn't been leaving riddles in blood. He'd been leaving them in wood. Tiny, carved effigies, each one unique, a subtle variation on a theme. And this woman, this girl, was a courier. "Who is he?" I pressed, the question hanging heavy in the air. Her gaze flickered towards the still form of the man on the ground. He was just following orders. He thought he was doing the right thing. The authorities spilled into the parking lot then, a flurry of flashing blue and red lights, a cacophony of shouts and commands. Uniformed figures swarmed, securing the scene, their movements efficient and practiced. I stepped back, allowing them to take over. My role was done. The young woman was led away, her eyes finding mine one last time. In them I saw not malice, but a profound sadness. As the chaos subsided, and the body was carefully covered, I stood by my car, the night air cool against my skin. The wooden bird was gone, taken by the investigators, another piece of evidence in a case that was finally, irrevocably closing. The master manipulator, the one who had orchestrated these heists, who had mimicked the methods of a killer long thought dormant, wasn't a phantom of my past. He was something far more dangerous. Someone who understood my weaknesses, who knew how to exploit the scars I carried, someone who was still out there, But I knew him now, I knew his game, and for the first time in a long time, the ghost felt a little less substantial. I had faced the echoes of my failure, and in doing so, I had found a flicker of something akin to peace. The hunt was not over, but the resolution had begun.